Good afternoon. I'm David Wessel. I'm director of the Hutchins Center on Fiscal and Monetary Policy here at Brookings. Pleased to welcome you along with my colleagues from the USC-Schaeffer, USC-Brookings Schaeffer Initiative for Health Policy. I think we should have an acronym. You might wonder why someone who's interested in fiscal policy is even doing an event on drug prices. My colleague Louise Shaner and I have decided two things. One is if it's like over $1 billion, we consider it fiscal policy. And secondly, seriously, if you're thinking about the fiscal future of the United States, you can't avoid thinking about healthcare prices and healthcare spending. And if you're thinking about healthcare spending, you can't avoid thinking about prescription drug prices. I'm very pleased that we have Scott Gottlieb, the Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, with us today. Dr. Gottlieb is a physician, but he actually majored in economics in college. Among other things, was a resident fellow at our neighbor, the American Enterprise Institute. Dr. Gottlieb was Deputy Commissioner of the FDA from 2005 to 2007 and returned to the FDA as Commissioner in May 2017. He told me that means 15 months into the job, and according to Gardner Harris of the New York Times, the average tenure of an FDA commissioner is 18 months. So I hope this isn't your last When Dr. Gottlieb was appointed or nominated to be FDA commissioner, there was quite a bit of criticism from people, many of them on the left, who felt that somebody who had done so much work with the drug companies wouldn't be an effective FDA commissioner. I think a lot of people have been impressed with how much energy he's put into trying to spur competition in the prescription drug market, which is what he's going to talk about today, as well as what he's done with trying to reduce the use of tobacco and other things. So we're very glad to have him with us today. He's going to speak. I'm going to ask him some questions. We'll offer you a chance to ask a few questions. And then because we have such intelligent design at Brookings, we have a panel that consists of one economist, one lawyer, and one physician to follow. So with that, Commissioner Gottlieb.
Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about biosimilars and not to have to talk about almond milk. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I want to talk about a plan that we're laying out today to try to instigate biosimilar competition. Our ability here at the FDA to build a market for safe, effective biosimilar products is key for patients, and it's key for the nation's healthcare system. It's also a key to us to promoting access and reducing healthcare costs, and it's a key to advancing public health. But we are worried, and I'm worried in particular, that the market for these products is still not firmly established, and the ability of these products to penetrate clinical practice and gain acceptance in clinical practice isn't yet firmed up. That doesn't mean that the future doesn't hold a lot of promise for biosimilars. It just means, in my view, that the future is uncertain, and the policy and the regulatory decisions that we make here in the present day are going to have a lot to do with whether or not we realize the promise from this new category of products, or whether we see the opportunities that we once envisioned from biosimilars go unrealized. We know that biosimilars are used to treat many serious and life-threatening diseases, and they become the mainstay for the treatment of cancer and autoimmune conditions, among many others. They're also very expensive. While less than 2% of Americans use biologics, they represent 40% of total spending on prescription drugs. So enabling a path to competition for biologics from biosimilars is a key to reducing costs and to facilitating more innovation in this space. And by enabling a path for competition for biosimilars, we also give innovators an added incentive to invest in further research that'll lead to the discovery of even better drugs that deliver additional benefits to patients. At the FDA, we're focused on advancing policies that make the process for developing biosimilars more efficient. And to achieve these goals, I'm pleased to announce today that we're releasing what we're referring to as our Biosimilars Action Plan. And this plan is important. It's an important piece of the administration's overall blueprint to lower drug prices and demonstrates the progress that we are making on delivering on the President's goals that we laid out earlier this year. Our plan is aimed at promoting competition and affordability across the market for biologics and biosimilar products. And before I focus on some of the elements of the plan itself, I want to talk about some of the broader goals that we're focused on at the FDA. At the agency, we recognize the critical role that Congress has given us to make sure the U.S. maintains a robust market for new biologics innovation, while also advancing paths that promote timely biosimilar competition to enhance patient access and to reduce costs for patients and our healthcare system. Preserving that balance between innovation and competition requires us to modernize our regulatory requirements to maintain efficient, predictable, and science-based pathways for drug review. Our aim is to reduce the time, uncertainty, and cost of drug development while also supporting a competitive market through the efficient approval of lower-cost generic and biosimilar and interchangeable alternatives after the expiration of patents or other statutory exclusivities. This cycle of market-based innovation and competition has helped America's biopharmaceutical industry become the leader among its global peers across the world. And when patients with life-threatening diseases look for medical hope, they often look first to American research. In many respects, America is the world's medicine chest. We've seen a lot of progress against vexing diseases in recent years, but I believe we're at the inflection point in medical practice. We're at the brink of an era that's comparable to the period just after World War II, perhaps, when we first introduced effective antibiotics. That period was a period where we went from temporizing many ailments to curing them. And I think with the advent of new platforms like gene therapy and more targeted drugs, we're at a similar point right now. In the long run, these therapies are going to be very disruptive. They'll not only improve medical care, but they'll also lower healthcare costs. And they'll defray, or in some cases even eliminate, the labor costs associated with chronic, debilitating diseases that can lead to expensive hospital admissions. And they'll help more people escape a trap of long-term care in settings that can rob them of their independence and their dignity and reduce their economic productivity. But these costs and these cost savings may be less visible than a drug sticker price, and they're an even greater drain, however, on our nation's finances and productivity. Yet we know these cost savings tomorrow do not pay healthcare bills today. So we must learn how to deliver both cutting-edge innovation and affordable access to new treatments in the present time and not decades after a product is introduced. And that brings me back to a discussion of biosimilars. Biologics represent 70% of the growth in drug spending from 2010 to 2015, and they're forecasted to be the fastest growing segment of drug spending in the coming years. To make sure that the next generation of breakthroughs remains affordable, it requires vibrant competition from biosimilars. But it also means that we need to consider new payment approaches, models that allow us to take advantage of the competition that biosimilars offer. Our current payment system, which reimburses drugs based on their average sales price, was designed in a single-source world. It was a market where biologics, where there was typically only one drug available in each category, and there wasn't a lot of therapeutic variety or therapeutic competition. At the time, and I was there at the time, there was only one EGFR inhibitor on the market, and there was just one VEGF inhibitor. I was there when we designed this system and implemented it at Medicare, and I can tell you that many of us didn't envision a world where there'd be so much competition in these therapeutic categories. So that system was designed that accepted the fact that government programs like Medicare would be price takers. We didn't have the advantage of drug competition to enable the development of formularies, bidding, and market-based negotiations like we have in Part D, in the Part D prescription drug plans. So the system we designed, using average sales price as a benchmark for reimbursement, was designed to help make sure that drug makers wouldn't be able to take big price increases once the drugs came to market. But it wasn't a system designed to take advantage of price competition because we didn't foresee that there would be multiple drugs in these different categories. That's not the case anymore. Now, with most of these biologic categories, we're seeing highly competitive markets with lots of different products aimed at the same target. Yet the current payment system isn't taking advantage or full advantage of this therapeutic competition. And so we need to adopt a different approach to paying for these drugs. The ideal system, in my view, would reimburse biologics in a competitively bid scheme where we would take full advantage of the multi-source competition. Even without these policy changes, right now, savings estimates from expected biosimilar competition are large. They range from $54 billion from 2017 to 2026, according to a study by RAND, to as much as $250 billion from 2014 to 2024 from just 11 biosimilars expected to be approved and marketed, according to a survey by Express Scripts. The assumptions and the timeline behind those estimates vary, but the fact is that the biosimilar market isn't as competitive as many observers hoped it would be after Congress first passed this legislative pathway. And so far, the real savings have been just a fraction of even the most conservative initial estimates. You don't have to look very far to understand why. While the FDA has approved 11 biosimilars through 2018, only 3 now are marketed in the United States. Competition is, for the most part, anemic. It's anemic because consolidation across the supply chain has made it more attractive for manufacturers and pharmacy benefit managers and group purchasing organizations to distributors as well to split monopoly profits through lucrative volume-based rebates on reference biologics or on bundles of biologics and other products, rather than embrace biosimilar competition and lower prices. It's anemic because litigation has delayed market access for biosimilar products that are, or shortly will be, available in markets outside the U.S. several years before they'll be available to patients here. These delays can come with enormous costs for patients and for payers. Let me give you one measure of these costs. At the FDA, we recently did an analysis of biosimilar competition across all OECD markets. We looked at what would have happened if all biosimilars that the FDA had approved in the U.S. were successfully marketed here in a timely fashion. And we'll release the full details of this analysis soon, but I want to give you some highlights of what we found. To measure the potential impact of this biosimilar competition, we assumed that the savings achieved in the U.S. in terms of price discounts would have been on par with the experience enjoyed in other OECD nations. And based on these assumptions, our analysis shows that if Americans had the opportunity to purchase successfully marketed FDA-approved biosimilar prescription drugs, they could have saved more than $4.5 billion in 2017 alone. These are large savings. They're about half of the nearly $9 billion in total savings in 2017 from all of the 2017 generic drug approvals, according to an earlier FDA analysis. And this analysis assumes that all of the biosimilars that the FDA approved was successfully marketed. But we know that's not the case. We know that litigation has blocked a lot of these launches. Yet our study found that the entry of a single biosimilar product in a non-US OECD market lowers prices relative to the reference product by 30%. And in markets with 3 to 4 biosimilar entrants, they have prices 35 to 43% lower than their reference biologics. Our savings estimates don't include additional potential savings from biosimilars approved in 2018. Estimated savings would therefore have been significantly greater than the $4.5 billion if these additional FDA-approved biosimilars were also marketed at or near the time of their approval. Biologic manufacturers have a right to defend their legitimate intellectual property interests, and we want them to continue to offer the benefits of improved versions of originator biologics. These benefits might include biologics that target diseases in new ways, such as delivering a toxic payload directly to cancer cells, as we've seen in some recent innovations, or biologics that target multiple targets of the disease simultaneously. These benefits might also include new formulations of established drugs that can improve delivery options, for instance, shifting from healthcare provider-administered infusions to products that a patient can self-administer at home, and therefore need less active physician monitoring for the administration of the drug. These types of innovation can deliver real economic and public health advantages, and the competition from new biosimilars might drive innovators to invest in these new opportunities. That's how biosimilars can help promote new innovation, just like with traditional generic drugs. This is how the advent of biosimilar entry should also inspire entrepreneurs to invest in new technologies and develop new monopolies around better innovations. But rebating schemes or patent thickets that are purely designed to deter the entry of approved biosimilars are spoiling this sort of competition, in my view. Long-dated contracts are another toxin. The branded drug makers thwart competition by dangling big rebates to lock up payers in multi-year contracts right on the eve of biosimilar entry. We're also concerned that volume-based rebates may encourage dysfunctional clinical treatment pathways. We've heard from multiple sources that some payers are requiring step therapy or prior authorization on the reference biologic before patients can access a biosimilar. We see no clinical rationale for these kinds of practices, since a biosimilar must demonstrate, among other things, that it has no clinically meaningful differences from the reference product as part of demonstrating biosimilarity. The branded drug industry didn't build its success by being business naive. They are smart competitors. But that doesn't mean we need to embrace all these business tactics or agree with them and think that they're appropriate. Some of these tactics should be unacceptable to every member of the drug supply chain. Biosimilars may be relatively new, but manufacturers' tactics to delay and frustrate Congress's legislative intent in this regard to promote competition in the drug pricing scheme date back for decades. These tactics were first honed in battles between branded drug companies and manufacturers of small molecule generics after passage of the Hatch-Waxman Act in 1984. And these battles have played out for a long time, but ultimately competition prevailed, and so did the benefits of small molecule generic drugs. In 1983, generics accounted for only 13% of U.S. prescriptions. Today, in 2018, it's 90%, and generics cost 75 to 90% less than their branded competitors. Robust competition has led to generic drug prices that are often less expensive here in the U.S. than in other developed markets in Europe and Asia. And the Association for Accessible Medicines, the trade group that represents the generic drug makers, estimates that generic medicines have saved the U.S. well over $1 trillion over the last decade. The generics market that we see today, while not perfect, is robust in most respects, but it took about 2 decades, longer probably, for it to develop. It took a long time for providers to grow comfortable with prescribing generics and patients to be confident in taking them. And it took a long time to work through legal tactics that were put in the way of competition. It took a long time for the coverage system to be changed in ways that allowed for brisk generic competition. Sometimes it feels like we're seeing the biosimilars version of Groundhog Day, with the brand makers replaying some of the same tactics and all of us being too susceptible to too many of the same misconceptions about biosimilars, their safety and their efficacy, relative to originator biologics. We're falling into some of the same doubts and policy constraints that were used to deter competition from generics in the years after the passage of Hatch-Waxman. But we're not going to play regulatory whack-a-mole with companies trying to unfairly delay or derail the entry of biosimilar competitors. We're not going to wait a decade for more robust biosimilar competition to enter the market. Expanding access to affordable biosimilars and slowing the rise of healthcare inflation is an even more critical issue today than it was in 1984. The higher costs and longer timelines required to develop biosimilars relative to generics means that these delaying tactics can make it uneconomical for biosimilar sponsors to postpone entry for extended periods of time. And I'm worried that the biosimilar manufacturers may pull out of these markets altogether if the branded drug makers are able to lock up markets, even in cases where there's a fully interchangeable biosimilar competitor. Ultimately, this behavior is putting innovative drug development at risk by eroding public confidence in market-based pricing mechanisms. Too many people are now shooting at the branded drug makers, and the shrapnel isn't just going to tear apart the gaming tactics that we might agree are gratuitous and ill-conceived. I'm worried that that shrapnel can also help fray the fragile market-based rewards that support new drug innovation. Our Biosimilars Action Plan applies many of the lessons learned from our experience with generic drugs to accelerate biosimilar competition with 4 key strategies. First, improving the efficiency of the biosimilar and interchangeable product development and approval process. Second, maximizing scientific and regulatory clarity for the biosimilar product development community. Third, developing effective communications to improve the understanding of biosimilars among patients and providers and payers as well. And fourth, supporting market-based competition by reducing gaming of FDA requirements or other attempts to unfairly delay market competition to follow-on products. I don't want to get into the details of the entire plan in my remarks today. We've issued that plan in its entirety. It lays out all of the discrete elements of the approach that we're taking. But I do want to highlight a few key actions that we're taking. I believe some of these actions could be transformative for sponsors' ability to bring high-quality biosimilars to the market. As part of this effort, the FDA is seeking to strengthen its partnerships with regulatory authorities in Europe, Japan, and Canada. Such partnerships can enable greater efficiency in developing safe and effective biosimilars. For example, we're actively exploring whether data sharing agreements could give us better insights into biosimilars' real-world safety and efficacy, and in some circumstances, facilitate the increased use of non-U.S. licensed comparative products in certain studies to support an application under Section 351K. We know that when those developing biosimilars use biologics sourced ex-US as their comparative product, it can lower the cost of clinical studies, since many of these products can be procured more easily and cheaply in European and Asian markets. In fact, about half the cost of conducting a biosimilar drug development program is the cost of acquiring the drug right now. We'll also be updating the Purple Book and evaluate whether we can incorporate additional information into that resource to give product developers more transparency on issues like patents. And we're also going to be updating the guidance to provide additional clarity on how biosimilar manufacturers can carve out indications from the labels where a branded drug maker might still maintain some IP. And we're going to describe how these indications can be efficiently added back to a biosimilar label once that IP has lapsed on the branded alternative. And we're going to be taking some new steps to challenge some of the gaming tactics that I talked about earlier. This includes new efforts to coordinate with the Federal Trade Commission to address anti-competitive behavior. We look forward to participating in additional forums with the FTC to jointly identify ways that we can deter anti-competitive practices in this space. So I hope you all stay tuned to what we'll be doing in conjunction with the FTC. As part of our drug competition action plan, we made it a priority to ensure that risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, or REMS, our safety programs, maintain their role in serving the public health and aren't used to delay competition from entering the market by refusing to sell the samples necessary for developing generic drugs. We're going to apply the same approach when it comes to our biosimilar action plan. One final important note that I'd like to stress from our experience with generics. FDA can't do it alone. Effective market competition from biosimilars depends on additional actions from our public and private sector partners to align reimbursement and formulary design to encourage appropriate biosimilar adoption. Competition requires all of us to shine a light on the anti-competitive impact of tying rebates and bundling biologics with other products to protect biologics market share. And it requires us to educate providers and patients about biosimilars and why people should have confidence in the safety and the effectiveness of these FDA-approved products. There's active work underway on bold reforms like shifting biologics from Medicare's Part B scheme into a competitively bid system like Part D, where we can take full advantage of price and therapeutic competition. These types of approaches can delink physician reimbursement from drug prices and inject more competition into the market while increasing the incentives to create the next generation of great innovation that's going to advance human health. And our new plan is aimed at laying the groundwork for these and other reforms to make sure that we're realizing these public health opportunities. I appreciate the time here to lay it out with you all. It's posted on our website. I look forward to the interrogation by David. And I thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I now feel like I'm an expert on biosimilars, which I wasn't 15 minutes ago, so I appreciate that. I want to just probe you a little bit on your diagnosis, why there's a lack of not enough competition. You kind of divided it into two parts. One was kind of deals among manufacturers, PBMs, and others in the supply chains that keep biosimilars off the market, make it hard for them. So just explain to me a little bit about what is going on there and who has the responsibility for doing something about it. You, the FDA, the Federal Trade Commission, Congress, the courts?
Well, I think there's certainly steps that Medicare and FTC can take. I mean, what I'm seeing is when the biosimilars come to the market, they can only penetrate a portion of the market. It's only about 15% of the market's easily accessible to them. What happens is that the incumbent biologics will often enter into long-dated contracts and offer big rebates right on the eve of biosimilar entry. They're astute competitors. And if the biosimilar wants to enter the market and come onto the formulary of a health plan or a PBM maintains the formulary, what effectively will happen is that the health plan will lose all the rebates being paid on that incumbent product because their contracts and the rebates are tied to being only a single drug on the formulary. And so the biosimilar has the challenge of having to discount enough and be able to shift enough of the market share from the incumbent product onto the biosimilar to offset those lost rebates. And that's nearly impossible. Even with interchangeability, it would be hard because there'd be reluctance to switch among patients and providers. And so the biosimilar literally can't discount to a point where they could offset the lost rebates, given the fact that when they come onto the market, they're not going to capture a lot of market share day one. And so that creates a real barrier to entry. And my concern is that if we see a number of failed launches in this space, or we continue to see failed launches or very difficult launches, you're going to see less people investing in this space. Certainly, the venture capital and some of the more entrepreneurial endeavors are going to pull out of these kinds of markets. What could be done about it, to your second question? I think there's probably certainly aspects of this that the FTC is looking at and can look at. There might be things you can do under Medicare. Certainly under Part D, it would be difficult to set rules of contracting because you would potentially pierce the non-interference clause, so you can't mandate that Part D plans contract in a certain way. But under Medicare Part D, you might be able to put in place provisions that prevent these long-dated contracts.
And Part D, you can do
Part
B,
yeah. Excuse me, that prevent these long-dated contracts, so they allow for more flexibility in the market. I suspect that would be scored as costing money. I think in the long run it would end up saving money because you'd have a more dynamic market, but there might be an impediment in that the actuary or CBO might score that as actually costing money in the near term.
So the other piece of it, you mentioned litigation, ways that the original biologic innovator uses the court system to delay the entry of a biosimilar. So one example that members of Congress have called attention to, and I can talk about that later with Josh from Amgen, is this deal that for Humira, where the maker of Humira entered into a settlement with two biosimilar companies, Amgen and Samsung. And under the agreement, as I understand it, this is according to Grassley and Klobuchar, Amgen and Samsung will not be able to launch their products in the U.S. until 2023, but they can launch their biosimilars in Europe in 2018. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about that slows the use of biosimilars here?
Well, I don't want to get into any specific litigation. I'm certainly not a expert on the legal environment, but we see issues around patent thickets as well in this space, where you can patent different features of the manufacturing process that end up also delaying the ability to carve around IP. I think that part of the challenge here is that it took many years for the litigation to work its way through on Hatch-Waxman. Now you have a relatively well-defined legal framework around small molecule generic drugs, and you actually have both sides loath to reopen any aspect of Hatch-Waxman because the litigation is so well resolved around that and it's predictable. The only people who probably want to reopen Hatch-Waxman are lawyers. But the problem here is that things haven't been litigated, and so you're seeing precedent get set in real time. I think the challenge we have is that we don't feel we have the time to allow that to play out in the same way that it did with Hatch-Waxman, because the drug cost issues are more acute now.
So both the practices in the distribution chain and the litigation are a way to kind of extend the exclusivity that an innovator has, right?
Well,
in practice.
In practice, I think that, in my view, the litigation is going to get sorted out. It's going to get sorted out by the courts. It could potentially be sorted out by Congress and action the FTC takes. I think that the way to impact market entry more immediately might be through some of the busting up these contracting provisions, especially when the government's the party to them. There's more immediacy to policy changes that could impact that.
Do you think we should think about the period of exclusivity and whether that's optimal for balancing the incentives for innovation and the encouraging competition?
Look, that's been carefully looked at, and I'm not in a position to relitigate the economic analysis that went into the 12 or 7 years, and the people were asking for 14. The arguments around that, it is the reality that the actual exclusivity period on products has, if anything, declined over the years. The effective exclusivity around these biologics is longer because of the difficulty penetrating the market with competition, but patent terms have actually come down over time.
One of the things that the Federal Trade Commission has beseeched the FDA to do is to change something that you didn't talk about in your remarks, this business of adding a random suffix to the non-proprietary name at the end of each biologics. So like there's a 4-letter thing that goes at the end, and the biosimilar doesn't have the same thing. And the FTC claims that this may reduce price competition, may create unnecessary costs. That's something that's under the control of the FDA. Do you agree with the FTC?
I disagree. I think this is a bit of a red herring. I've had a lot of conversations with the FTC trying to inspire them to bring litigation in cases where we see anti-competitive practices. I wish that they would focus more on the legal activity and less on a scientific nomenclature that we use for pharmacovigilance. But this is important for our own pharmacovigilance. We still have an open question of whether or not we're going to apply a suffix or alter the branded company's name as well. There would be a lot of cost to the system of doing that. But the fact that it's differentiated with a suffix, and that is important for our pharmacovigilance, our post-market assessments of these products. If there is a trade-off there, it's a small trade-off, and I think the trade-off is worth it relative to what we achieve in terms of an added measure of safety. I think what some people would like would be to have more inadvertent substitutions, because everything would have the same name and you wouldn't be able to keep track of it in the marketplace. I'm not in favor of inadvertent substitutions. I'm in favor of true substitutability of these products, and that's what we need to work towards.
So, as I understand it, there's one standard to have a biosimilar. That is, that has to have no clinically meaningful difference between the original biologic. And there's a higher standard for interchangeability, where it can be substituted without doing harm to the patient. Depends on state laws and stuff. How, and as I understand it also, correct me if I'm wrong, no FDA-approved biosimilar has reached that interchangeability threshold. Is that important? How important is that, or do you think it's less important than some of the other issues?
I think it's important. It's not a higher standard, it's a different standard. You have to do an interchangeability study and demonstrate that you're not going to have adverse clinical consequences, the most obvious being the development of neutralizing antibodies to the protein. And if you're dealing with a biosimilar that's an innate protein, replacement protein is something that's very important to sustaining life. You don't want to develop neutralizing antibodies to it, because you'll become dependent upon, if it's to Epogen, you'll become dependent upon blood transfusions. If it's obviously a monoclonal antibody and developing neutralizing antibodies, it might be therapeutic alternatives. So the amount of data that you'd require and the safety threshold would be different. I think it's important to allowing the market to be more competitive, for sure, but what surprised me is it seems to be less important to the manufacturers than trying to address some of these commercial barriers. Even with interchangeability, they would still face a lot of obstacles gaining significant market penetration at the outset and being able to move a lot of market share. So it's certainly a key ingredient, but it's not going to solve the problem on its own. And look, we're looking at, as part of this announcement today, we are going to finalize the guidance on interchangeability. And we're going to do all we can to push the boundaries on trying to make that a surmountable hurdle for more products. And so we'd like to see more products be able to claim interchangeability in the market. But I don't think that alone is going to solve this challenge. For a while, I did. I thought if you had interchangeability, you could just move a lot of market share at the outset. And that's not what I'm being told.
What changed your mind?
Talking to the manufacturers of biosimilars and understanding the market.
I see. Okay. I think we have time for some questions. We have some people with microphones, and this is being webcast, so no one will hear your brilliant question if you start talking before you get the mic. I'd like to be sure that everybody who asks a question tells us who they are, and make sure it's a question. You can give speeches at the next FDA public comment period. I'm going to start with a couple of the panelists. Wait for the mic. It's coming. That one isn't on yet.
Oh, okay, great. Commissioner Gottlieb, Lemoore Daphne, Harvard Business School. Thank you very much for your remarks. I'll have a chance to make a few of my own and some other comments, but I wanted to ask a question about what you just said, which is you said that you had thought interchangeability would make a huge difference, but you heard otherwise. And my question for you is, if there were a fix for the rebate trap, which you described very well, would you then think the interchangeability was a critical element to getting the benefits of competition?
I think it would have more impact. I certainly do think it would have more impact if there weren't these commercial barriers to entry. So it's, I don't mean to diminish it. It's a very important regulatory step that we could take to set up more market competition. But I think if we were to be more, gratuitous in how we offered interchangeability right now, I think the biosimilar manufacturers would still face a lot of obstacles to gaining market share. So it's not going to be the only ingredient given the commercial obstacles.
And is this the big difference between the U.S. and Europe, that in Europe they don't have these locked up for 3-year contracts with the...
Yeah, they do. A lot of the countries there, it depends on which country. Some are more aggressive than others, but they do nationwide tendering. And so they'll forcibly switch patients from one product to another, sometimes on an annual basis, and some countries are quite aggressive at doing that. So if we're looking for scientific evidence on whether or not forced switching has a clinical consequence, we have a great natural experiment going on in Europe right now. Great. Hopefully we're collecting good data, which we are collecting data on that, because the Europeans are switching patients back and forth on some of these products, and they're doing it with some of the products that are innate proteins as well, where you'd have more concern that if you develop neutralizing antibodies and you can no longer maintain the protein in your system, you're going to become dependent upon something that could be far more intrusive.
Well, I'm glad the Europeans are experimenting on their population for our benefit.
It's very nice to do that for us.
Paul Ginsberg.
Hi, Paul Ginsberg from Brookings. The way that for Part B drugs, the way that Medicare and many private payers pay as a fixed percentage of ASP, seems as though that would really be getting in the way of biosimilar use by physicians. How significant is the need to make changes in that to open up the biosimilar market?
Well, I want to make sure everybody knows. So some drugs are paid for under the Part D drug benefit of Medicare, the relatively young benefit. Some are paid under Part B. Those are often administered by physicians. And now the physicians get a fee equal to 6% of the average sales price. What is it? Average sales price. Yeah. So these drugs are really expensive. So 6% can be a lot of money.
Well, I think this was largely addressed in the Affordable Care Act, where the physicians largely held harmless for that 6%, because they're effectively paid the equivalent of what they would have earned on the branded drug for prescribing the biosimilar. I believe I'm right on that. So, you know, the 6% is on the innovators. Right. So the 6% that you're being paid,
same amount of money. Same amount of money. An expensive drug.
So we're actually overpaying relative to the cost of the drug to administer the biosimilar, assuming the biosimilar is cheaper than the branded drug. So they effectively fix that, but it's kind of an awkward fix, because you're paying more than you should.
Can you hit the mic, Josh?
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for your talk. I think that relates to
Josh,
another.
Can you identify yourself?
I'm Josh Hoffman from Amgen, and my question to you is, it relates to this point about payment in Part B. The vast majority of biosimilars that are being developed and that will come to the market in the next 5 years to 7 years are going to be physician-administered drugs. Those are not the drugs where you have this big rebate issue, traditionally. In the market today, I understand there's a lot of concern about the rebate issue, and it's all, it needs to be evaluated very carefully. But in the biosimilar space, the big rebates are not in the physician-administered world largely.
But is that true? And more of them are moving on to, as the PBMs buy the specialty pharmacies, more of them are moving into that reimbursement scheme.
That may change over time. You're right. You're exactly right. But at least in today's world, when you see the competition that exists and you see the molecules that are coming to the market, they're really not in that world. So I guess the question around reimbursement in the Part B space, there was that leveling of the playing field that we just described. Is there any other thing that you think might be more effective in the physician-administered area than the rebate issue, because it just may not be that relevant, at least for the next several years?
Yeah, look, I mean, you also have the issue of the long-dated contracting that's going on the Part B side and the specialty side, on the physician-administered side. And you also have a function where, since you don't have a competitively bid scheme on the Part B side, there's less incentive to try to negotiate real big price discounts and use the biosimilar to negotiate a better price, because you don't have formularies, you don't prior auth the branded drug relative to an alternative. So I think if you're going to want to do something very bit disruptive on the Part B side, that's why I mentioned trying to move Part B into a competitively bid system, and it could be moving into Part D and using some of the savings to offset the increased out-of-pocket costs to the consumer, or looking at the competitive acquisition program, trying to reinvigorate it. The issues that come up with the logistical challenges of doing that make no sense to me. I think we've seen a lot of supply chain intermediaries figure out how to solve logistics, and at the end of the day, the cost of goods here is relatively low. So if there is some lost goods in the process, the contracts could force the companies to eat that, because unless you're talking about gene therapy or CAR T, the cost of goods is relatively trivial.
So
I don't know if you disagree. You're shaking your head. I can't figure out if you. We won't ask them.
We'll ask them. Ask them later.
Ask them later.
Are all those kind of changes to Medicare, could those be done on CMS? And
They can be done under CMMI. I mean, you
don't need legislation.
Well, thanks to the prior administration, they created a vehicle to obviate all forms of congressional
so I see
intervention.
You want to now take advantage of the provisions of the ACA
well,
you criticized when the bill was passed?
I didn't criticize that. I think the people who wrote that never thought that they wouldn't be the ones using it.
Well, I'm sure that's true. Okay, I'm going to take there's a woman in the back, and then I'm going to take 3 questions, and we'll get answers to 2 of the 3.
Hi, this is Deb Williams at Pfizer. I have to say on your comment about the 6% add-on, what we've seen from competitors to our biosimilars is them advertising to the physicians that they still lose money. With that, I'm sure we could be happy to send you that material, but it is interesting. I'm not quite sure what their rationale is. It could be because of the discounts to high volume practices, but it is an issue. Thank you.
Okay. There's a gentleman on the aisle here. Got it. And why don't you give it to this woman here?
Hello, my name is Tyler Cherry. I'm from SKD Knickerbocker. Thanks for being here, and thanks for Brookings for hosting. So as you know, Senators Grassley and Klobuchar recently wrote to the FTC noting what they've done in the past, the last 2 decades, to address anti-competitive behaviors, lawsuits, working with Congress. I know you said stay tuned, but can you give a preview of what you see the FDA's role in this new partnership with the FTC will be to address these anti-competitive behaviors?
Well, we just get one more here. No one. Okay, go ahead.
So my question came around
You are, please.
Gillian Woollett with Avalier Health. My question was around interchangeability at a reason, and I am both a European and American, so I cover both sides of the Atlantic.
We guessed that.
At a recent meeting in London Medicines for Europe, FDA explained to the audience that for the purposes of physician prescribing, FDA already agreed with Europe that the biosimilars approved by FDA were interchangeable. Is that something you could help the broader community understand by having such sources on your website? Because I think as a primary source, FDA does carry that extra weight.
Yeah, we're undertaking as part of this, and we've started already an education campaign around biosimilars, and we have some dedicated resources, substantial resources to doing that. And this is something we've done in this small molecule world for some time. As far as the partnership with the FTC, we have worked with them to provide information where we think that there's anti-competitive behavior, as well as I don't want to say instigate certain scenarios, but certainly when certain scenarios seem to be unfolding, work in concert with them through the activity to make sure that they have transparency on what's going on. And I think we've handed them some pretty good set of facts in the past. I'm going to be meeting with the FTC, the new FTC commissioner, really soon, and meeting with some of the individual commissioners as well to talk about what more we can do here. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I think that there's places where we can help identify information that can help them bring actions.
My impression with often true in antitrust legislation is that the lawyers are reluctant to bring cases because they feel the case law is against them and that their odds of winning are slim. Is that the problem here, or is there something else?
Well, I think generally speaking, prosecutors are reluctant to bring cases that they don't think are airtight. I think policymakers sometimes think from a policy standpoint it's important to test the boundaries of where your authorities are in these regards. If there's an overriding public health prerogative, and then if you're wrong, that's a role for Congress to step in and decide whether or not you need additional authorities and legislation. So, I don't have to be the one to lose the case in court, but I think that there's probably some more cases we potentially could be bringing.
Okay, I'm going to do a couple more. There's a gentleman here in the front and a gentleman in the aisle. Howen, can you give this gentleman here? Can you raise your hand so she can see you? And then over here, yeah. Next, yes, please.
Hi, my name is Jeff Hausfeld. I'm a retired surgeon, now the chief medical officer and chairman of the board of Biofactura, a biotech company in Maryland that produces biosimilars. I do feel like we are reliving history because in the 1980s, I was one of those docs that used to write, do not substitute. on my prescriptions. And here we are again. Doing the same thing over and over again. So I applaud your efforts, but it is going to take a significant educational push, because before I got into this business, I had no clue as to what it really meant to manufacture drugs. And most 99% of physicians out there also have no idea of the restrictions, of the analytics, of the quality that has to go into manufacturing a drug. We need to teach them so they can feel comfortable in utilizing these drugs for their patients. Secondly, so right now I'm in the middle of writing a protocol for my phase 1 for ustekinumab biosimilar, and I'm going to ask you, what should I do? Do I need a 3-arm study, or do I need a 2-arm study, because I can just use the EU reference drug and not have to have the US reference drug, which is 2.5 times more expensive? And lastly, what is going to be the FDA's stance on if you have a successful IND submission with a successful phase 1, what does phase 3 look like?
Well, I think on the first question, this is what we're going to try to clarify in some of the upcoming guidances in terms of what you need to do, what the bridging study needs to look like, and whether or not we can use the knowledge that the U.S. reference listed product and the European reference listed product might be manufactured in the same facility. Right now, we literally have situations where if you wanted to use a European product, even if it was manufactured in the same facility as the U.S., you could do that, but then you'd have to do a bridging study to the product in the U.S., even though we know full well that they're the exact same product because they're manufactured in the same facility. So we're literally exposing patients to drugs in a clinical trial just because we can't acknowledge something we know. We're going to see whether or not there are ways that we can acknowledge that knowledge, and it might even be through data sharing arrangements with the EU. Now, the branded companies are going to feel that represents CCI and is their protected
What's CCI?
Commercial confidential information, is their protected information. But I think that there's a public health prerogative here to at least ask that question and see how we can address it. So those are the kinds of things we're going to be looking at as part of this process.
Hey, last question.
I'm not sure I quite understood the question.
If you have a successful phase 1, what does phase 3 look like? What is your expectation for phase 3?
I think it's going to be variable, and it gets back to also the question, the issue you raised at the outset with respect to physician acceptance of these drugs. I think physician acceptance of these drugs and probably the regulatory requirements are going to be titrated based on whether or not you're dealing with curative therapy or chronic therapy, and a product where if the product does have some differences in its clinical performance, it's detectable to the physician over time, and you can intervene versus, if it's a product being used as curative therapy in a short course for the treatment of advanced cancer, that's something where there might be different clinical requirements, and there's probably going to be greater physician reluctance to use that product.
Okay, last question. I hope it's a short one.
I'll try. Andrew Spiegel from the Alliance for Safe Biologic Medicines. Thank you for all you're doing to get safe and effective biosimilars to patients. My question follows up on the naming discussion that you had, and I want to thank the FDA for continuing to keep patient safety at the forefront by requiring unique names, and that's the suffix that the gentleman was talking about earlier. But last week I attended a meeting here in Washington that we hosted, including a number of FDA senior leadership, WHO, and Health Canada on the naming issue. And there was general agreement around the room for the reasons that you articulated, that a global naming harmonization policy should be in effect. And what we heard back from the WHO really was that there's going to have to be a call from the regulators for that to happen. And so Health Canada, the U.S., and other regulators that support this are going to have to band together and put pressure on the FDA to get other regulators together to push this patient-first policy forward. And I wondered if you could comment on any steps that you would take as FDA commissioner to help push that global policy forward.
Well, I was involved in these discussions 10 years ago when that convention was established under the WHO, and I think it was unfortunately influenced by people who wanted to have substitutability without having to demonstrate it in a scientific process. At least some of the folks who were involved in that discussion. I don't want to cast aspersions on everyone who was involved in that debate, but and I think the Europeans got what they asked for. They got a system where it's very hard to track which products patients are on, so doing post-market pharmacovigilance is challenging. I'm not sure how I'm not sure what opportunity we have to relitigate that. This has already been solidified by the Europeans. I'm looking at my FDA colleague. So there might be some forums that I'm unaware of, but we did have this debate in a robust fashion about a decade ago, and I'm not sure our point of view prevailed globally.
Okay, with that, thank you very much, Scott, for your time and your candor.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.